The year is 1893. A 12-year-old boy from Germany loses his parents. He inherits a small sum from them, but it is later stolen while he is traveling. Despite losing everything, he holds on to one thing: his unwavering passion for watches. This very passion would help him build one of the world's most prestigious watch companies. This is the story of Rolex watches. Following his parents' passing, 12-year-old Hans Wilsdorf became an orphan. His future seemed bleak. His relatives sold his parents' business and sent him to a boarding school. There, he befriended a Swiss boy who educated him extensively about Switzerland's renowned watchmaking industry. Soon Hans realized that his true calling lay in this field. That's why in 1900, at the age of 19, he left Germany and relocated to Switzerland. There, he secured a job at a watchmaking firm called Kuna Korten, where he was assigned the task of verifying the accuracy of hundreds of watches daily. This role deepened his enthusiasm for crafting flawless timepieces. In 1903, he decided to settle in London. However, during his journey, he suffered a major misfortune. The 300 German gold marks he had inherited were stolen. This was a substantial setback, yet his only choice was to move forward. In London, he found employment at another watchmaking company in the sales and marketing division. Over the next 2 years, he acquired in-depth knowledge of manufacturing, sales, and most crucially, consumer preferences in the watch industry. He observed that most watch companies prioritized extravagant and decorative designs, whereas customers actually sought simple, precise, durable, and elegant timepieces. Determined to revolutionize the industry, 24-year-old Hans resolved to establish his own watchmaking enterprise. However, a major obstacle stood in his way: insufficient capital. To overcome this, he partnered with his brother-in-law, who provided financial support. Thus, in 1905, the Wilsdorf and Davis firm was born. Hans and his partner understood that watches were indispensable for travelers, who relied on them to catch trains and buses on time. This insight would shape the future of their company and redefine the watchmaking industry. That's why they decided to produce pocket watches specifically for travelers. Compared to conventional watches, this one was designed to be smaller, making it more convenient to carry. The pouch for this watch was crafted from high-quality leather, ensuring durability while giving it a premium appearance. This timepiece was named the Portfolio Pocket Watch. Despite being the company's inaugural product, it became a success. Even though Hans began his journey with pocket watches, he never intended to be confined to their production. He foresaw that wristwatches would eventually replace pocket watches. That's why Hans redirected his focus toward crafting world-class wristwatches. However, the challenge was that customers at the time were reluctant to embrace wristwatches. There was a widespread belief that only women wore them. Hans was determined to change this mindset. In 1906, he noticed that both men and women in Britain enjoyed wearing bracelets. He recognized a significant business opportunity in this trend. Consequently, he introduced gold and silver wristwatches to the market. Instead of using leather straps, these watches featured bands made of gold and silver, making them resemble bracelets. Furthermore, rather than calling them wristwatches, they were marketed as bracelet watches. This clever branding strategy helped Hans's timepieces gain immense popularity throughout Britain. Additionally, he observed that most watches available in the market bore their manufacturers' names as brand identities. Hans wanted his watches to have a distinct, recognizable name, something that could fit elegantly on the dial and be easily pronounced in any language. He experimented by combining different letters and generated over 100 potential names. Eventually, he came across a name that sounded refined and sophisticated: Rolex. He trademarked this name in 1908. Today, wristwatches are not just tools for keeping time, they also serve as accessories that enhance one's style and personality. Rolex watches were performing well, but they still faced accuracy challenges. The primary issue was that wristwatch movements were too small, making it difficult to achieve precise timekeeping. As a result, no one had succeeded in designing an entirely accurate wristwatch movement. Until 1910, Hans imported Swiss-made movements for his watches, but then he decided to develop his own. He delved deep into the science of horology, studying time-keeping mechanisms and seeking guidance from the world's finest watchmakers. Over time, he became an expert in watch movements, paving the way for Rolex to set new standards in accuracy and innovation. Hans then developed his first wristwatch movement, 15-line caliber 200. He submitted it to Switzerland's official chronometer testing institute for certification. The institute conducted extensive tests on the movement. Eventually, it became the world's first wristwatch movement to receive a chronometer certificate. In essence, Hans had successfully engineered an exceptionally accurate wristwatch movement. This breakthrough significantly enhanced Rolex's reputation, and soon his watches began to be exported to various European nations. By 1914, Hans had established multiple branches of Wilsdorf and Davis and built a team of 60 highly skilled individuals. His enterprise was expanding swiftly. However, an unforeseen event halted his progress: World War I. To compensate for war expenses, the British government imposed a 33% export duty on watches. Overnight, Rolex's prices soared by 33%, making them significantly more expensive than foreign competitors, leading to a sharp decline in sales. In order to sustain his business, Hans had no choice but to relocate his company to Switzerland. Up until this point, Rolex had merely been the brand name of Hans's timepieces. Upon arriving in Switzerland, he rebranded the company as Rolex Watch Company. Nalwadi, restarting many of his business operations from scratch. The market for luxury watches had collapsed due to the war. However, Hans noticed a fascinating trend. There was a sudden surge in demand for wristwatches among military forces. Timepieces were crucial for soldiers in combat, as they enabled precise coordination of firing sequences and marching maneuvers. However, pocket watches were highly impractical for timekeeping during battle. A soldier would need to lower his rifle, unbutton his coat, and retrieve his watch just to check the time. This inconvenience led military forces to shift towards wristwatches, which offered a far more practical solution. In response, Rolex introduced trench watches for soldiers. These watches were designed with unbreakable glass, a sturdy frame, and a luminescent radium-coated hour hand, allowing soldiers to read the time even in low-light conditions. The trench watches enabled Rolex to expand its business despite the war. Soldiers who fought in World War I were celebrated as heroes in their home countries. When civilians saw these soldiers sporting wristwatches, they too began adopting them. As Hans had foreseen, wristwatches ultimately supplanted pocket watches. However, wristwatches had a significant drawback. Their accuracy was compromised by dust and water. Hans was determined to overcome this issue. He envisioned a sealed watch case that would safeguard the internal mechanisms from heat, dust, and moisture. Hans observed that most watches were assembled using a snap-on mechanism, where all components were stacked on top of each other, similar to how a tiffin box is assembled. However, this method left tiny gaps, which allowed dust and water to seep in. To counteract this, Rolex pioneered the world's first screw-on mechanism, which secured the watch components using precision cut grooves. Additionally, rubber gaskets were used to seal any remaining openings. Lastly, the winding crown was tightly fastened, akin to a submarine hatch, ensuring complete waterproofing. Like an oyster, this watch could remain submerged for extended periods without sustaining internal damage. This innovation led to the birth of the Rolex Oyster in 1926. Given its groundbreaking nature, Hans knew that revolutionary marketing was required to promote it. He learned about Mercedes Gleitzer, a swimmer who claimed to be the first woman to swim across the English Channel. However, many had doubted her achievement. To silence her critics, she decided to attempt the cross-channel swim once again in the presence of the media. Seizing the opportunity, Hans reached out to Mercedes Gleitzer, offering her the role of Rolex's first ever brand ambassador. To showcase the waterproof capabilities of the Rolex Oyster, Mercedes was instructed to wear the watch around her neck while swimming. Initially, her attempt appeared successful. After 10 hours of continuous swimming, she had covered 80% of the English Channel. Unfortunately, exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she had to be rescued. Although she failed to complete the swim, the Rolex Oyster remained fully functional when examined afterward. Despite her unsuccessful attempt, Mercedes Gleitzer gained widespread recognition for her perseverance, and in turn, the Rolex Oyster earned fame as the world's first waterproof watch. Hans strategically featured both Mercedes Gleitzer and the Rolex Oyster in advertising campaigns. Moreover, he devised an ingenious marketing stunt, displaying the Rolex Oyster inside a fish tank in retail stores. These tanks contained live fish, further emphasizing the watch's waterproof ability. In 1928, Hans enlisted British actress Evelyn Leigh as another Rolex brand ambassador. In advertisements, Evelyn was depicted wearing a Rolex Oyster with her hand submerged in a fish tank. This unique promotional strategy significantly bolstered Rolex's reputation for crafting waterproof timepieces. The company's success soared to new heights. While the world celebrated Hans Wilsdorf's achievements, he remained unsatisfied. At the time, all watches were entirely mechanical, meaning they operated without a battery and instead relied on a mainspring for power. The mainspring required manual tightening by rotating the crown. Once wound, the mainspring would gradually unwind, powering the hands of the watch. Essentially, it functioned like a wind-up toy. These watches needed to be wound every 2 days. In the case of the Rolex Oyster, if the crown was not securely closed after winding, water could easily infiltrate the watch. Therefore, Hans set his next objective: developing a fully automatic timepiece. Hans dedicated years to solving this challenge. Ultimately, he pioneered the perpetual rotor, a semicircular component capable of rotating 360 degrees within the watch. Connected to the mainspring through a series of gears, the rotor would spin as the wearer moved the wrist. The gears would then transfer energy to tighten the mainspring. Essentially, the watch could be wound simply by being worn. This innovation led to the creation of the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. While others had attempted to build automatic watches before, Rolex became the first company to successfully implement the mechanism. The perpetual movement solidified Rolex and Hans Wilsdorf as legends in the watchmaking industry. However, in 1939, Rolex faced yet another challenge: World War II. The global conflict disrupted supply chains, causing a significant decline in Rolex's sales. Over the following years, Hans worked tirelessly to ensure the company's survival despite the turmoil. Then, another personal tragedy struck. In 1944, he lost his beloved wife. The preceding 6 years had been the most difficult of his life. However, having faced adversity since childhood, Hans had developed a resilient mindset. He gathered his strength and returned to doing what he did best: creating world-class timepieces. By 1945, Rolex celebrated its 40th anniversary. To mark the occasion, the company introduced the Rolex Datejust, the world's first automatic watch featuring a date display. However, some users found the date difficult to read due to the small display size. As always, Hans sought a solution. It is said that one day a drop of water landed on his watch, magnifying the date display. Inspired by this, he introduced a 2.5x magnification lens on Datejust watches, effectively addressing the issue. By 1960, Rolex had launched several revolutionary timepieces. In 1953, the Rolex Explorer was introduced, a robust, unbreakable watch designed for mountaineers and adventurers. In 1955, the GMT Master debuted, featuring a rotating bezel to assist pilots in tracking time across different time zones. Then, in 1960, Rolex unveiled the Deep Sea Special, an experimental watch engineered to withstand extreme underwater pressure. To prove its durability, the watch was taken to the deepest known point of the ocean at that time, nearly 11,000 meters below sea level, where it continued to function flawlessly. This is how Rolex cemented its status as the ultimate watchmaking brand. Whether at the peak of Mount Everest or the ocean's depths, Rolex was the only brand capable of enduring such extreme conditions. Hans Wilsdorf accomplished feats in horology that no other watchmaker had even imagined. In 1960, at the age of 79, Hans Wilsdorf passed away. However, he left behind a legacy, an iconic watch brand that ensured his name would be remembered forever. This was the remarkable journey of Rolex. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.